Gold Trails and Ghost Towns with Mike Roberts and Bill Barlee.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I'm Mike Roberts, and with me, our tour guide through the Gold Trails and Ghost Towns is Bill Barlee. Bill Barlee is a former school teacher. He's a placer miner in his own right, author of Histories of British Columbia, and student of the way in which riches were made in the early days of British Columbia. Bill Barlee, where are we going to look on our first exposure to the riches of British Columbia?
Mike, probably one of the most fascinating areas in the entire interior. This is the Slocan, which eventually became known as the Silvery Slocan, and we'll see why tonight.
So that's in southern central British Columbia.
In south central British Columbia, north of Nelson.
Yeah. Now, what was special about this Silvery Slocan? Who discovered the silver, first of all?
Well, first of all, it was discovered in 1891, which was in the high point of the West Kootenay, coming into the focus of the mining regions of the Pacific Slope. And two guys were rather disparate partners. One was a guy called Eli Carpenter, and the other was a guy called Jack Seaton, who was an Irishman. Carpenter was a French-Canadian, and they had heard vague rumors of silver in the so-called Slocan district, and they were at Ainsworth when they heard these rumors. And Ainsworth was a bona fide going camp. So they struck out looking for the Slocan. They found the Slocan, got lost in their travels. And to get their bearings, they hiked up to about the 7,500 or 8,000 foot level of a mountain, an unnamed mountain. And at the top of that mountain, almost at the peak, they found a 5-foot vein of almost pure galena. And galena is silver, lead, zinc ore. They were astonished. This eventually became the Payne mine. But they made their way back to Ainsworth, and at Ainsworth, Carpenter was less than ethical. He gave his partner lead pencil assay, which meant that he had rubbed out the true values and given him an assay that was very, very poor.
A lead pencil assay.
Yeah.
Okay, remember that.
But a bartender happened to overhear Carpenter planning to go back into the Sandon via the Slocan River route. And he told Seaton. So Seaton struck up Kootenay Lake, the other side, with 4 other Irishmen, Hennessy, McGeegan, and Flint. These were the Noble Five. And they beat Carpenter and his party into Sandon and established the mine called the Noble Five. And of course, then there was the Payne and the Noble Five and the Rico and the American Boy and the Slocan Star and dozens of other properties, some of them producing millions of ounces of silver. Hence, we got the name the Silvery Slocan.
Hennessy, McGeegan, and Flint, and Seaton, the Noble Five. We'll be back in just a second to take a look at the Silvery Slocan country. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee. I love that. Only the Irish could come up with a partnership called the Noble Five. Hennessy, McKeegan, Flint, and Seaton.
That's right.
And who did they write out again? Carpenter.
Yes, they had to let Carpenter go because he was less than a good partner.
Yeah.
And Carpenter, of course, was a fascinating guy. He was a circus roustabout and a high wire man as well.
And that's the wonderful thing about these people. I mean, they came from such diverse backgrounds. They had to get lost to find the fortunes, and yet there were fortunes there to be made. There are other communities in the Silvery Slocan, I guess, and the first shot is of one of them. Where does this place?
Yeah, this is Whitewater, or Retalix, called by both names. And this is typical of one of the mining camps in the old Slocan. And this was taken a few years ago. And it shows the type of terrain the prospectors had to penetrate and explore and prospect to find the magnificent mines.
So it was a mountain like that they had to climb to find the streak of nearly wonderful galena.
That's right. And surprisingly, Mike, they climbed every mountain and went down every valley, and they've covered literally every square inch.
That's remarkable. This is a place called Zinkton?
This is Zinkton, remains of the Lucky Jim mine. And that was taken about 10 or 11 years ago, that shot.
Is that a little further north? Because the mountains there look a little more precipitous.
Actually, that's on the other side of the divide. And this is towards the west. This is towards New Denver and Sandon and Three Forks and Cody and Alamo and so on.
You always bring with you interesting little props. A tobacco tin in itself is kind of neat. I mean, Dixie plug smoking tobacco. This one, though, weighs a fair chunk because it's got some stuff in it there. What's What's this material?
Well, that's almost pure silver. It's come through the ball mill, and it's about 96.2% pure, which is purer than sterling. And this is the type of ore that the miners of the Slocum are looking for, and which they found, by the way.
Yeah. And you got quite a bit of this ore, and you made it into some interesting material.
Yes, that's another story. We'll have to cover that in a future program, I think, Mike.
Oh, all right, all right. We've got some other things to take a look at as well, as far as the photographs are concerned. This is one of the first shots ever taken of Sandon.
Yes, this is probably 1895, and shows an early view of Sandon, Carpenter Creek in the background, and Rico Avenue in the foreground with the buildings lining Rico Avenue.
I don't think we've told anybody why they called it Sandon.
Well, named after John Sandon, who was one of the early men into the town, although he wasn't the most famous. The most famous was a man called John Morgan Harris.
How big did Sandon become?
Well, you hear all sorts of stories about Sandon. Some people say it had 10,000 people. Probably the maximum was 2,000 people. That would be between 96 and 98. They had 24 hotels, and they had a number of other businesses, of course.
And it was served, as I guess every town that was worth its salt was served by one or two railways.
Well, this particular town had two railways, the K&S, and here's a picture of the K&S, one of the Baldwin locomotives. And that was the railway that came from Caslow over the divide and through some of the toughest country in the Northwest.
I know we like to talk about mega projects today, but these were mega projects of their era, weren't they?
Oh, this was an incredible building feat.
Because they had to get in while the ore was there.
Sure,
and so
they did.
all that had to take place, that construction had to take place quick.
And it did. It was just a matter of months by the time the K&S, which was a Great Northern subsidiary, came in.
But was this the main way that ore got in and out of town for a while?
At first, this is where supplies came in. This is Bartlett Brothers' pack train, which eventually, this is probably 1896, and they're coming down Rico Avenue in the center of Sandon, and they eventually went to the Yukon. But this is where a lot of the ore came in via the pack trains.
Did they line up for this photograph? I can't believe they all look so eager. They look like they're there and posed. Is that really the way it happened?
I think they realized they were part of history. I actually do.
And so they just held still because, and the photographer, there's got to be a story behind that.
Yeah,
guy.
probably Truman. I'm not sure this shot was Truman, but I think it probably was. And he was one of the most famous photographers in the West Kootenai area.
Rico Avenue. Here's a little item from the Corporation of the City of Sandon. It actually was a city.
Yeah, it was. It was incorporated in 1898 and was a bona fide city, so they had to have a population of well over 1,000, and they made the mark quite easily.
So taxes of $2.70 down here. They got pretty standardized taxes. Somebody here had $1.35 and received from J.M. Harris the sum of $34.65 taxes due by him on this date, 1898.
1898, the high water mark of Sandon, probably.
All right. As far as, I guess, the shot of the town, which we'll see in a few moments, but the town evolves around a couple of streets.
Oh, certainly it does.
This is Rico again without the pack train.
This is Rico without the pack train, and it gives you an idea, because those buildings extended right down to the end. It isn't as obvious in this photograph as it should be, but the buildings extended right down to the end of the photograph. It was lined with literally scores and scores of businesses.
What would that street be, a mile long?
No, it'd probably be about half a mile long.
And it certainly was well set out. It had all the amenities of a modern town, 1898.
Sure. Here's one of the gas lamps prior to the coming of electricity to Sandon, which was the second place in the interior. By the way, Eli Carpenter walked across from the top of those buildings on a high wire, on a taut rope, when he wasn't too sober either, to celebrate the 24th of July.
So Carpenter survived his falling out with the Noble Five to perform in Sandon.
Oh, sure he did.
All right. There's another shot showing some of the shops and places. The poster on the side there, I think, is the one which is most illustrative. Most of this town was American in a Canadian environment.
That's right, and most of the money was made by Americans. Many of the men from Spokane, from the so-called Inland Empire, were quick into Sandon and quickly bought up some of the best properties in the whole area.
We got the register for the Hotel Rico.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is wonderful. I think the television commercials are a thing that bothers people, but even the register had commercial. These particular names are people who came to perform in Sandon.
Sure.
Who are they?
That was the Fictal comic players, and they were about a 16-member troupe, and they came through, and they performed all through the West. But Sandon was high on their itinerary because they had several thousand people, and of course, you know, the miners were waiting for entertainment.
Yep.
And, they were one of many groups that came through the town.
Friday, March the 14th, 1902. And look at, there are the commercials. P. Burns and Company Meat Merchants.
Patty Burns, yeah.
Godfrey, Deputy Mining Recorder. Where did you get this? Where'd you get this?
That came out of the vault of the Rico Hotel originally, and then ended up in the Virginia block.
People had such great signatures. Now look at, here we got something from January 1902, and their signatures just exude importance.
Yeah, my uncle's in this book too. He was bank manager of the Royal Bank in New Denver, and they had copperplate writing, almost what we call copperplate.
Clay S. Berryman, Spokane.
Yeah, he'd be an investor.
Room 19. How much did it cost him for a room at the Rico Hotel?
$1 a room usually. It was the finest hotel in town.
Yeah.
And meals were from 25 cents up.
What a fine piece of work that is. So when did Sandon reach its pinnacle?
Probably just before the Yukon rush, about 1896, 1897, although the price was off silver a little bit. And this shows you Sandon at its height. This is an 1898 shot showing the two railroads and showing the city clustered around Rico Avenue and a lonely little church up on the side hill. One church with 24 saloons. It had an opera house. It had 2 newspapers, 2 railroads, scores of businesses, and 2,000 people.
Well, one of the railroads is at the bottom right of your screen, and the other railroad is sort of halfway up the hillside on the left of your screen.
That's correct.
And did they meet up around the back?
Well, actually, they turned around up top. There was some debate about that.
Yeah.
And there was high feelings between the K&S and the N&S. The N&S was a CPR subsidiary line, and the K&S was a Great Northern line.
That's a creek that runs down the backside. You can see some of those small buildings. Maybe you remember them from your farm days. There are outhouses that back onto, what creek is that?
That's Carpenter Creek, coming right down the center of Sandon.
And the main street is just up beyond that.
That's right. It's on the left-hand side.
And that's its heyday.
Now, this is what happened in May the 3rd, 1900. Sandon, an accidental fire started in the Opera House and spread through the town with absolute rapidity, and there was no way to stop it. Usually what they did is they blew up a building in the path of the fire. There wasn't even time to do that, although there's kind of an interesting story in that the CPR, which we just mentioned, they had a station house in Sandon, and the people didn't like the CPR, generally speaking, in Sandon. They preferred the K&S. So whenever there was a fire in Sandon, whether it was down the gulch or up in the red light district or on the north side of town or the south side of town or wherever it was, the first building to get blown up was almost always a CPR station.
And it was in this case, but to no avail.
But to no avail.
So what was the reaction of townspeopeople to the loss of their town? I mean, what did they do?
Well, surprisingly, there were some high-stakes poker games going on in town, and they just took the tables outside, complete with poker chips and cards on the tables, and continued playing while the town burned around them, which is rather hard to believe, but evidently that is so. And then they started rebuilding immediately, but instead of building alongside of Carpenter Creek, they flumed over Carpenter Creek, built a walk right across it, and Carpenter Creek then became the center of the town. That is the main street.
A boardwalk over Carpenter Creek.
And this shows the boardwalk, and you don't see Carpenter Creek in that photograph at all. This is probably taken about 1920. It isn't the town it was. The population is probably about a third of what it was in 1898, but it's still a substantial town.
Still hauling silver out of the mines. How many mines?
At this time, the number would have been decreased probably by about 2/3, so there'd be some mines carrying on.
The fact that they boarded over Carpenter Creek was part of really the key to its final destruction, wasn't it?
That's correct, yeah. After they boarded over Carpenter Creek, of course, in 1955, there was a very high water year, and it plugged up the flume at the top of the street, and eventually it plugged it up, it dammed it right up, and then of course the flume broke through, or at least the water broke through, and wiped out the entire main street, and had adverse effect upon the town itself.
How long ago? I mean, is there anything of Sandon left?
Yeah, there is, Mike. There are about 10 buildings left in Sandon. This was one of the buildings that was actually taken down by the individuals who wanted to salvage the lumber from this building. This is probably the second best hotel in Sandon. That shot was taken in 1952, probably by Sidney Norman. And this shows the Sandon Hotel, and the stained glass windows were destroyed, and the old bar inside was taken down into the United States, and it sits in a honky-tonk joint in Spokane.
Oh, who would do that? Oh, what was the purpose of tearing it down? 1955 isn't that long ago. It would seem that the historic perspective wasn't that important in those days.
No, surprisingly, the whole town was still standing even after the flood. It could have been and should have been saved, I think, because it was one of the classic ghost towns of the West.
That was the Sandon Hotel. There's another couple of photographs that show some of the other things. This is the Miners' office.
Union Hall, yeah. This is the Western Federation of Miners.
And they're wrecking it. They saved the material that they took out of it?
Yes.
These are salvagers.
Most of that went down into Silverton or New Denver itself, some over to Caslow. And so this building was taken down piece by piece, as was the building next door and then other buildings shown. And
the last shot, a bit of a color photograph, I guess, again, to give you the idea that there's reasonably modern evidences of it. What's this place?
This is the Virginia block, and next door is the Burns building. The Virginia block now is not in that condition. The top story is gone. We managed to save the sign, and the other building is still standing, the brick building, although in a state of dilapidation right now.
So, Sandon, it was the biggest town, the most wealthy town in the Silvery Slocan, the one with the most money?
Caslow might dispute that, but I would think that Sandon would, at the height of its power, yes, it was the most wealthy town in the Silvery Slocan. No doubt about it.
So it started in the mid-1890s?
Mid-1890s, reached its peak probably by 1897, early 1898, began to decline slowly thereafter, and by the time John Morgan Harris died in 1953, it had pretty well gone over the top, and by 1955, the flood really administered the coup de grace, and then the salvagers came in after that.
Okay. Take a break and come back in just a second, because as is the case with all of these stories of riches being made one way or another, there are some treasure stories, and we'll be back and have Bill Barlee tell us a couple of treasure stories right after these words. Welcome back. I'm Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee with Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I've got a handful of interesting things. You know, this is what's wonderful now about these ghost towns is the things that you can find that bring back that era. Now, where did you find these? These are little kind of coins.
Yeah, those are tokens, merchants' tokens, and they're good for a drink or good for a loaf of bread or good for a cigar, and two of the three of those were found under the old boardwalk in Sandon many years ago, and I recovered them in about 1970.
And these were struck by, this one was struck by the Rico Hotel in Sandon, and it's good for one cigar, and they'd hand them out to their valued customers.
Sure, and make sure they came back.
Poker chips, as you already pointed out, the poker game was as important as the burning of the town in some cases.
Surprisingly, some very high-stakes games, and they were even used in trade, something like the tokens. In fact, some of these poker chips were actually put in the collection plate of the church in town. So some of the gamblers, even the high-stakes gamblers, did go to church on Sunday morning, and instead of putting in cash, if they didn't have any cash in their pockets, they put in poker chips, and surprisingly enough, church didn't hesitate to cash them in.
Well, it's the coin of the realm, right? You can do that. These are paper tokens, so they'd be particularly difficult to come up with. One drink, Rico Hotel, Sandon, BC.
Yeah, drink was 25 cents, so that was a pretty nice gift.
Yeah. There is a treasure story. One of the ones that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up because you came close yourself, didn't you?
Yes, surprisingly I did. Actually, the three treasure stories concerned with Sandon. Very good treasure stories, but the one that perhaps stirs the imagination most of all happened in 1970. And in that year, an American came drifting through the area from Seattle, and he was actually reading one of my books and decided to take a look at Sandon, and went into Sandon. Sandon was in a state of disrepair. It was kind of decrepit then, so he didn't stay very long, and he doubled back towards Three Forks. And at Three Forks, there was very little there. There was an old house belonging to McGaskill's there and a little flat where the town once stood. And Three Forks is about 3 miles from Sandon. But there was a guy digging in the bank, digging for bottles, a man named Edwards from Trail. And he asked Edwards where he should, if there's any other area. And Edwards mentioned that there was the Alamo, which was an old camp way down Carpenter Creek, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles, but pretty tough 2 miles. And so this guy looked across Carpenter Creek and saw that the bridge across Carpenter Creek couldn't carry his car, but he decided to take a chance. He had the rest of the day to kill. So we walked across the railings on the bridge, or the planks, and got to the other side, and he had a decision to make, to go up the side hill or down kind of an indistinct path which followed the creek. He decided to take the indistinct path following the creek and went down probably about 3/4 of a mile, and that was the old right-of-way of the N&S, the old CPR railway, overgrown by then. And as he went down, he saw that there were tunnels going into the side of the mountain as various miners had tapped the silver riches in that particular area. And as good fortune would have it, there was one tunnel going into the side of the mountain, and there were tracks coming out and some water coming out the mouth of the tunnel, and he decided he'd investigate. He didn't have a light, so he went into the tunnel and got back about 35 or 40 feet, and his light started to give out on him. He was ready to turn back, but he was a smart boy. He was feeling the top timbering, which is the dry timber. So sometimes you find tools, the occasional gun, in the old days when we were kids.
Keepsake.
Sure. Sometimes a map of the workings. And he came, and as the light dimmed on him, he couldn't see. He felt what felt like a keg. So he felt the keg, tried to lift it, couldn't lift it. Said, oh, well, there's square nails. It was nail keg. Turned around, walked out of the tunnel. Had second thoughts. Thought maybe I better check it. Looked down at his feet, and there was a piece of 12 by 12, so he could get leverage to lift this keg of what he thought was nails out. Went back in the tunnel with the 12 by 12, found the keg, stepped in the 12 by 12, lifted the keg off, carried it out, couldn't see inside it. When he got close to the portal of the tunnel, he looked inside. He was so surprised, he dropped the keg. It partly broke open at his feet and out spilled several thousand gold and silver coins. No copper or nickel coins, and there was a reason for that. Well, he was absolutely astonished, and of course what he should have done is kept it to himself, but he didn't. He patched the keg together, struggled up towards Three Forks. Old Edwards was still there, and instead of keeping it to himself and putting this treasure in his car, he blurted it out to Edwards, who was astonished, absolutely astonished. Then the guy understood that he shouldn't do this because he was in a foreign country, put the keg in his car, took off in a cloud of dust. Edwards phoned me. We missed him at the border. So we couldn't get this treasure, which really belonged in Canada. It was part of the historic, one of the historic treasures of Canada. Yeah. Should have stayed in Canada. The guy went back into Seattle and piecemealed the stuff out and eventually got rid of all of it. That was 1970, just before the price of gold went out of sight. So he got about 140,000, probably would have made $1 million on this particular one, because some of these coins were double eagles and $2 gold pieces, $3 gold pieces, 2.5s, 1s, and so on. So, and they were all gold and silver because the miner who originally had this mine had been killed in a cave-in. He didn't trust silver and gold, at least he didn't trust paper money. Yeah. He only trusted silver and gold.
He didn't trust banks.
That's right, he didn't trust banks, didn't trust the Bank of British Columbia or any of the other banks in Sandon. And so consequently, he had his own bank in the back of his shaft and or tunnel, and he kept it there until he was killed by a cave-in, until this guy came along about 70 years later or 75 years later.
What a wonderful story.
Yeah.
Feel around the top of the cribbing.
Don't take a chance. Pretty dangerous stuff.
Bill Barley, thank you.
You're welcome, Mike.
That's Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. We'll be back next week to take a look at more wondrous riches.